I'm Daniel Patrick Brennan, and this is Vintage Stories. Welcome back. Today's episode is sponsored by the Gimblett Gravels wine growing region. Sorry, I don't want to mess that up. There's a trademark in there that's very important. But what you got to do is go to gimblettgravels.com, click on Terroir, then click on About, and check out the annual, and read up there a little bit, figure out what's going on with the Gimblett Gravels if you haven't already done so last week when I told you to do so. Then you want to look around at the annual vintage selection. This is the best of the best from 2015, from what was a great vintage, an intense vintage, by the way, not a lot of fruit on the vine that year, from a cold spring. And you want to check out that annual vintage selection. I don't know that a lot of people know that this wine is up for the public. A lot of it goes out to media and press all over the world. These beautiful packages. It's a group of red blends and some Syrahs. But they're available for you to check out. Of course, the price is a little dear. I heard somebody say that to me this week. But you're talking about an amazing collection of wines, and good luck trying to get all these wines in one package yourself. And let's think about it. This is pennies on the dollar to some of these Napa producers in Bordeaux, which can be hit or miss, and Napa, which can be big and maybe not that much excitement about the style, though I like a big cab once in a while. But anyway, getting back to the Gimblett Gravels. A real special selection of wines. So check that out. This is all part of the series. I've put up a new sort of folder on the website or image, and you click on and you can go in, and this will be now, I think, our second episode in the Gimblett Gravels. I've already got a couple more that I've spoken to. So anyway, we're also sponsored by Decibel Wines, of course. Go out, hashtag Decibel Wines and hashtag Drink Decibel. I am Decibel Dan, at Decibel Dan on Twitter and Instagram. Facebook is Decibel Wines. We've got the great website and store up there, shipping to the UK, Australia, the US. We're about to put up Europe as well. So what you want to do is use the promo code DBPodcast at checkout, and you'll get 10% off your first order. Today we are speaking with Warren Gibson, once again, I've known Warren for years and found out a lot of interesting things about him. I knew he had spent some time in Italy. I didn't realize the extension of his vintages in southern Italy, and just his whole life experience is interesting. This is going to be one where you may have to rewind and go back and listen. Warren speaks fast, and he puts a lot of information in there, and there's a lot of great information. So if you got to stop, what did he say there? Collect it again, maybe listen to it twice. It's probably one of those, or go back and listen to it a month from now and see what you could collect. I actually had to sort of rewind him towards the end and go back and get more of his history, because we were just going on and on about a lot of other things. But when I think if you when you look at a craftsman and you look at an artist, which is probably two different descriptions for a winemaker, you want to look at some individual work. You want to look at what they've achieved with certain wines, but you also want to look at the body of work. And when I think you consider those two things, you're talking about a guy in Warren Gibson who is up there with some of the best winemakers in the world. He's got a long history at Trinity Hill. They've had some stunning, amazing individual wines, but I was just in the tasting room last week, and every single wine I tasted was cool and interesting. And if you're looking for a really good Hawke's Bay cellar door experience, I really suggest going into Trinity Hill. And then let's not forget about his amazing, almost like a totally different style. You see his fingerprint on both wines, but his La Collina and his Balancia wines are just something different completely. The fruit's different. They come from up on the hill above the Gimblett Gravels, but you're just talking about a great winemaker and a really good guy. And I hope you guys enjoy the podcast. There's a couple contentious things in there about the Gimblett Gravels, which I found really interesting. So enjoy that. And one thing I always forget to say is if you have any comments or any, if you want any correspondence, just email us at decibeldispatch@gmail.com. And enjoy it, guys. Cheers. So I'm here with Warren Gibson from Balancia and Trinity Hill up the road, and we're talking to Warren about Warren, but also a little bit about the Gimblett Gravels I think we wanted to get with. But it just dawned on me, how long have you been at Trinity Hill?
Just sort of work it out based on my son's age. So we moved here and started a family in the same year. So that was 97. He was born 98, January 98. So it would be, keep getting mixed up whether it's 19 or 20 vintages, but I think it's 20. Yeah, so 20 years. Yeah,
you're always like a year more than you think. Because I'm the same boat. It was like, moved here in 08, even though I've just finished 10th vintage in 17. But your first vintage was 98.
No, it was 97. So it's possibly 21 when you think about it, because you've got a couple of zeros in there. So yeah. I think it's possibly 20 years and 21 vintages now.
97 was not a great one?
97 was a very cool vintage. I wouldn't say for us it sounds like a winemaker again here, right? But it wasn't. It was a very good vintage for us because we had quite young vines and
bright fruit.
Yeah, really lovely fruit, and I was able to sort of get through some sort of weather, and we made some excellent wine in our first vintage in 97.
And how long was Trinity before that? Like in it?
The owners, originally three partners, which is part of the sort of Trinity name, but the owners are English owners, Robert and Robin Wilson from the UK, bought some lands where the winery is situated in 93, and the first vines were planted in 95. And that was, they also bought about 20 hectares of the Gimblett Gravels, or it wasn't called the Gimblett Gravels, but off Gimblett Road.
So the original Trinity Hill vineyards were just kind of around the hill, but not on the gravels? Is
yeah, so the winery the site was, they bought 45 acres, hectares, sort of 8 to 20 hectares around the winery with the two hills behind there. So that was mainly for the site, not for we have a very small vineyard there with some Chardonnay now, but it's more for the site. So, and they actually have a house on the back of the hills to the left, and I somehow managed to purchase 15 acres off them in 97 and plant our own little vineyard from 98. So yeah, we go back 20 years for that too.
And what do you call the Gimblett Hill or something? Don't you have like your own little appellation?
Yeah. Well, yes, sort of half and mock sort of Gimblett Heights, yeah.
Gimblett Heights.
So it happens to be possibly the best sort of vista, or Gimblett Vistas maybe.
It sounds like the ghetto name for the Gimblett Gravels or something.
That's right. So we have a lot of. I like to put a toll gate because we tend to have a lot of visitors to come up and see. It's a great view, not just of the Gimblett Gravels and see back down towards Bridge Par.
Can you see the ocean from up there?
We can see the ocean if you've got good eyes, yes, on a less than hazy day. And you can sort of see the trees of Marine Parade and Napier. And right, you can
just see it from across the street here, but I would imagine that much closer.
You can sort of see the horizon of you can see Cape Canaveras. And so it's quite a panoramic view, and it is beautiful. So, cool. But the vineyards were down Gimblett Road off the left of Gimblett Road, and now 20 years later, Trinity Hill owns about 42 hectares of the gravel, and then 3 or 4 different sites.
You guys have that, the old, was it Mark Blake's vineyard there now too?
Yeah, that's a bit of history there. So that original vineyard was owned by Gavin Yort and David Irving, who I don't really know, but over time the ownership changed, and so Babbage, they took the fruit and made Irongate, both Chardonnay and Reds from that site, and I don't remember exactly the years, but Gavin and David, I believe, sold to Trinity Hill late. I'm getting decadally challenged as I get old. Late 2008, 2009, I think, to Trinity Hill, and then we actually sold to Mark Blake, who is a Californian gentleman that came and totally replanted the block amazingly well to mostly Bordeaux varietals. And then Mark sort of lasted 5 years there, and then sold back to not necessarily exactly Trinity Hill, but it's back in our hands now. And so we have that vineyard, which is the original Irongate vineyard, and I believe Babbage they either already had land next door or bought land next door, and they make their Iron Gate wines from the neighbouring vineyard now. So it has some real history. It's actually quite a silty block in a lot of cases.
So that's kind of where the river dumped a bit?
Yeah, it's a meandering sort of river. So that's the old path of the Nararoto. So 1867, back 10,000 years, that was where the river was going. So it's I got that wrong. So 10,000 years ago, the river went the bridge path side of Roy's Hill, and then got banked up and went to the west of Roy's Hill, and yes, went through that vineyard up until 1867, where now the
big shift
shift went towards Fern Hill. So very young soil, really, in a lot of cases.
And so most of the Trinity Hill plantings are all down Gimblett Road there on the left, basically, or is there some now spotty other spots? We
don't really have a perfect domain in terms of our vineyards. So we have three Gimblett Gravels vineyards, making up 40 hectares, and then a little bit of Gimblett Gravels out in front of the winery where we've got some Chardonnay, and then
it's a pretty good amount. That's good.
It's a good size. It's a good size.
And reds, obviously, but Chardonnay as well.
We tend to have our Chardonnay in the much heavier, siltier phases, and so that vineyard we've been talking about is now called Tin Shed. It's not a lot of thought went into the name because there is a shed of that that style in the.
It happened organically.
So we have our Chardonnay and Marsanne in the more heavier phase. I'm not convinced the Marsanne shouldn't be on stones, but we've made very good wine from it on the heavier soil. So we believe Chardonnay and Merlot are much more suited to the slightly heavier soils.
Sure.
And the Cabernet family and Syrah we have at the extremities of that vineyard, which is much more gravel. So, and our vineyard nearer the river, which is, I guess, with Craigie Range, the closest to the now river path, is much more stony and warmer, and I believe are more suitable for Cabernet and Syrah than the other side of the road. But everybody has little pockets. And
you guys get quite a bit of Chardonnay from off the gravels.
I'm a very big fan of Hawke's Bay Chardonnay, and I think the Bridge Bar area is one of the absolute highlights for that. But also there are lots of other sites, in Teawonga and inland and some of the hillside sites around with some sandstone and limestone that can make amazing Chardonnay.
Yeah, it seems like to put it this way, I've been driven out of the Chardonnay business because I've only bought a little in 2014, and then I started searching to make some in the next couple of years, and it was like, man, I'm not going to make a $30-$40 Chardonnay. If I want a good fruit, I only want so much of it. I'm not going to manage the block totally myself, so I guess I'll make Viognier.
Yeah, there's definitely been a revival with Chardonnay, and I guess great pricing and everything along the way comes with it. So I think it's a very exciting category, and it's one that's, it's not going away. It's been sort of like an icebreaker. It just keeps on going through fashion in terms of up, down, and otherwise. And Chardonnay's, probably 5-10 years ago wasn't on everybody's front of their tongue, but it seems like it's having a great revival, and I'm probably biased in saying it, but I think Chardonnay and Hawke's Bay's, really the white wine that we should be really focusing on. So
it's the one. I mean, it's the one for me. I think throughout New Zealand, it's been something that was reinvented for me when I moved here. It's so expressive here, and it's got a fruit element that. I found it in other Chardonnays from France or California, but in dribs and drabs. Whereas I just find it so much, I don't know if it's winemaking or older vines or what it is from these other places, but in New Zealand, from top to bottom, Kume down to Otago, you just get these amazing different styles. And we had a couple last night that were really good in a tasting we did, and they're just so distinctive,
Yeah, I think also the great thing is that the consumer and the people buying your wine are they're quite knowledgeable, and they're quite happy to tell you quite honestly about what they like and don't like. And I think it's a maturity in the market as well. And there's definitely a huge range of styles, and right from the big heavy sweet sort of yellow wines, sort of more of the past, to things that go very lean and skeletal, and everything in the middle. So there's something for everybody, and possibly why people still get a little confused about what Chardonnay really is. But
Yeah, I was just thinking when he said the consumer, there's a story. We were talking about stories before we started recording. The story of the, what works in the market and consumers and things like that. And I was thinking of, everybody thinks Kim Crawford is this big giant Marlboro Sauvignon Blanc producer, which they are, but I'm pretty sure it all started with their release of their unoaked Chard, and it literally said unoaked Chardonnay, and it came out. I don't know how well it did in New Zealand, but it was like exploded in the U.S. Because everybody said, "Yeah, well, I don't like oak all this," but what it actually did in the long term was open up Chardonnay again to a lot more people, and then they eventually went back to drinking, maybe slightly more oaky or creamier styles, things like that. But it's kind of an interesting little blip in the story to shift gears, and it probably has happened in other things as well. But.
Yeah, I think that's the Chardonnay thing, isn't it? People that don't want Chardonnay, but they're quite happy to buy and drink Chablis. It's like, I don't like Chardonnay, but I love Chablis. So, anyway.
Yeah. Okay, just buy it. Yeah, that's great. So, you guys have had, when I first got here, Trinity Hill seemed very well established, and you've sort of seen, I don't know, ups and downs, but sort of a lot of different changes in Hawke's Bay. What has been for you the biggest thing that you've seen, at least from the time that you've been here? Or has it just been like a slow climb? I know we had the global financial crisis sort of shook things up a little bit for us. I don't know if it hurt us as much as some other countries, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's we might need more than a podcast to discuss this one. But listen, I'm a salaried employee of the company and always have been, so I've not really ever had any shareholding to discuss the ins and outs of the beginnings and some of the path to where we are now, other than.
I mean, also in just what you've seen in Hawke's Bay.
Yeah, listen, I think Hawke's Bay, from a wine quality point of view and a range of varietal point of view, is absolutely the place that motivates me to make wine in New Zealand. And we talked about Chardonnay and obviously the historical strengths with the Merlot Cabernet style and the sort of Syrah, which is the new star. However, I guess there are some other sides to the coin with this, and that's not what the average person that thinks about New Zealand wine outside of New Zealand is really thinking in terms of what our strengths are. So it's obviously Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough and Pinot Noir from more than one region. So that's always been Hawke's Bay's slight sort of struggle in terms of the image of what we do best, and also we're making great examples of varieties that can be made in a number of other countries. So I think we still have that challenge and that marketing.
Yeah, you guys are muttering the water a bit too by making really good Hawke's Bay Pinot. So
Trinity Hill, we have Sauvignon and Pinot as a big part of our export program, particularly for the US, and we have our wineries now owned around about 70% by US investment. So the great thing is that we're back into the US market after a couple of previous goes at it, and yes. We really have to have Sauvignon and Pinot as that entry.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then at good price points, where with the exchange rate at the moment, it works. And then really bring in our other portfolio that we're probably definitely more known for domestically and probably internationally as well. So the Merlot Cabernet or Cabernet Merlot based wines and Syrah, particularly for us, we sort of like to own that category as much as we can in New Zealand, and that's been a struggle, as you know. Syrah in the last 15 or so years in the US has had its own difficulties, and so we're working hard to really position what for me is the one variety that says I'm from Hawke's Bay. So for any of the varieties that we make well here, I think it's Syrah that says I'm from this place, and that's really what's given Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir its position. It's actually tastes like a unique product and something that people can really grasp. So
yeah, I think the Psalms can really get their head around it too. From my experience of being out pouring wines in the States, they can, and I guess for certainly fine wine, it starts with with the som and the wine buyer, and they seem to get their head around it, and they can, at least hand sell it. Whereas the red blends is a bit of a tougher category for us to say. Well, I thought you made Pinot and Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc and Syrah. And well, we do those too. And they're actually really good, and that's the longest history and everything. But maybe it's pretty similar to what you said too, where it's some people are like, yeah, I don't really like Syrah, but I drink a lot of Rhone.
It's that same old one.
Yeah. So, but I've seen that, and I have seen a lot more Trinity Hill wines when I've been in the States the last year and a half. Seen it pop up in Virginia and D.C. and New York and places like that. So that's cool.
Yeah, no, that's great. And
have you been over there a bit to do?
Yeah, I've generally done since the shareholding change. I've been averaging a couple of trips
That's good.
year. So yeah, and we're still got a lot of work to do, but we're definitely seeing we're past the lag phase and hopefully get into the log phase.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting place to visit. I think it's exciting. There's a lot of people. Seems like everybody's studying to be their WSET. There's a lot of wine knowledge.
It's a great trip for me. Of course, people when I get back say, "Well, how was your holiday?" And it's definitely not a holiday.
No, it's full on.
As you know, it's bouncing from airport to city to airport to and
domestic flights aren't as nice as they are in New Zealand either.
You don't want to necessarily miss your plane, or get caught up in security. But no, people don't really want to hear that story. It's an amazing. Most wine regions and most places you go to sell wine are pretty cool. So, and I've got to a number of cities that I've never seen. Mostly inside retail bars and restaurants, but occasionally get out to see the actual city. So,
what was new for you that you liked there?
Well, I mean, Texas. So obviously Dallas, Houston.
Houston is crazy.
Yeah, it's a big city.
It's nuts, man. Because I had heard years ago that. I'm from Philly, so I heard Houston just blew by Philly in population. This was, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And of course, from Philly, we got a chip on our shoulder, and I said, what's the big deal? And I went through Houston, and I was like, okay, I see it. It's like highways upon highways, and it's nuts, man. There's like 4 parts of the big city, and it's like, but the wine market is encouraging there.
Absolutely, yeah. And Austin is like a sort of a slightly different city,
like
but
more of a beer and whiskey town.
Yeah. So I mean, probably you can settle in there for a day or two if you get a spare weekend, and then mostly around the extremities of the country, I suppose. So Florida and New York City and Boston, and obviously on the West Coast. LA, San Francisco. So they all sound like nice places to visit as well. So it's fun and it's just fun. It's fun seeing our wines get great recognition, and we just have to work on more and more sales and work together as a country and as a region. And I think you're starting to see that. Yeah,
well, it's a lot better because when I was first with my 100 cases of wine or whatever, trekking around, I would honestly see Craggy Range on a list here and there, and maybe something else every once in a while. And that's actually not good it's probably not even good for Craggy, to be like, what's this one wine from this one region, where now you're starting to go into, Morton's or Del Frisco's, these big steakhouses and places that have bigger wine lists, and you'll see maybe 3. Which is good, or 4 or something like that.
400% improvement.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I think it's a big deal. And but anyway, getting back to the Gravels, not that I have any notes here or anything that I want to specifically talk about, other than what I think one of the things I've been discussing with people is how the association or the wines have come across internationally because of their distinction of style. And, there's certainly, I think it's pretty easy to get a glass of blended red from Bridge Pa and put it next to a blended red from the Gimblett Gravels and pick out some differences. But I'm wondering stylistically, when they do these like Bordeaux tastings, on the one hand, we're saying the Gimblett Gravels are distinct and they're interesting tannin structure and things like that, but then they're also getting confused with Bordeaux at the same time. So I obviously understand the depths of all that, but if you had to explain why that is to people, why do you think people who haven't had a Gimblett Gravels or maybe only have had a few wines from there, why do you think that is?
I think well, you go back to the absolute sort of base level, and it's the soil or the lack of soil and the gravel that gives the Gimblett Gravels wines their particular taste, and I think that's amplified when you use the Cabernet family, so Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc on these soils, and Merlots I'm still not absolutely convinced about Merlot on these soils, and if you go back to the Bordeaux model, definitely Merlot's not generally grown on these stony soils. I think that Cabernet gets ripe in a very nice way in that climate in most seasons, so you have that lovely edgy Cabernet Cassis thing happening, and Franc is a beautiful variety for that little region as well when it's grown on the really warmer parts of the sub-region, and that's something that's not quite understood. Even within our 800 hectares, we have quite a range of sites, so it's
clones
and clones, and so and still very unevolved. So we're still learning, and it'll be a lot of years in the future before we get it close to being absolutely right. But why you would maybe see that sort of Bordeaux character, I think we're not doing anything particularly different to Bordeaux in terms of winemaking. We've got great clonal material. We've got great terroir and great soil. So use oak that has that taste profile. So yes, you can sort of understand that if your raw ingredients in terms of.
Do you see a pushback in that with any of your peers as far as saying, well, because I've heard the old, well, we've got to stop calling them Bordeaux blends.
Yeah, don't say the B word.
Yeah.
So the difficulty both on label and just getting out there marketing that particular style is it's quite a clumsy sort of, if you say you have 5 different varieties, including perhaps Malbec and Petit Verdot, it's quite a mouthful, and so I guess people have come up with the classic sort of Merlot Cabernet, Hawke's Bay Merlot Cabernet, or California went down this Meritage path, and
I don't think that worked out too well.
So we sort of give ourselves a little whack on the hand when we say Bordeaux blend, but it is some way of categorizing it, but it's not the ideal, and I'm not sure we've resolved the best answer for that. But we tend to call it a classic sort of Cabernet Merlot style, which already is more words than I'd like to say.
Yeah.
However.
Yeah, you got to have like a little tight thing for the Twitter, for the marketing people,
So at the business level with Trinity Hill, they trademarked the name The Gimblett, which may not have made everybody completely happy. So our wine made from those 5 varieties, I'm not going to say the B word, is called The Gimblett. And but that, there's definitely some confusion as to what that might be. Obviously, the back label will, if you have a back label, gives you the opportunity to describe the varietal mix, but on the front label that can be very clumsy and a lot of print and not that nice to look at. So it is a challenge for that particular style for sure. Whereas Syrah or Chardonnay or varietals that are just one, then it's a lot easier and a lot easier.
I don't discount the fact that people say, well, why is Malbec so popular? I'm like, well, it just sounds cool to say.
Yeah.
Same with Shiraz 20 years ago in the States. It's like, I think people, I literally heard it when I worked at my family's restaurant. They'd be like, give me one of those Shiraz things. Shiraz, they just like to say it, and that by the glass, can generate a lot of sales,
Yeah, well, we've seen that. So Viognier obviously has some good history in New Zealand, and everybody got quite excited sort of back in 2002, 3, 4 time. But people have never found it very easy to say. We planted Marsanne 2008-9, and now make a Marsanne Viognier, and it's quite.
I like that wine a lot, by the way.
Yeah, it's a cracker, and we find that it's a much easier sell because people just find it more comfortable. I'll have a bottle or a glass or whatever, a case of the Marsanne. They just don't even mention Viognier.
Yeah.
And with
Marsanne,
So, whereas some other names are quite, intimidating. So we make Tempranillo, which I think the average person coming into the tasting room may not have a massive grasp of Spanish, and it's not an easy word to say. And so the funniest one I've had is somebody coming in and ask for a trampolino. So it's one that bounces around your palate.
Sure.
Whereas Montepulciano, which isn't necessarily easy to say, has it's got that sort of Malbec thing. It's like
Monty.
And Monty and the Monty and people. I think we could make. Yeah, maybe you shouldn't say this, but I think we could make Montepulciano of almost any style and would still sell because it's there's something there, and going back to
it is more of a. I mean, I'm sure there's fine ones, but that's more of a Quaffurgo, style from Italy. That at least a lot of the Montes I grew up drinking and being around was, it was like a good wine by the glass. Good, maybe not necessarily table wine. There's, like I said, fine wine of it, but we're not talking about Brunello or anything like that. It's an approachable wine.
That's right.
So that helps as well.
I don't think people necessarily know what it's meant to taste like, but it's got a sexy Italian name, so that's half the battle.
Hey, man, I'm guilty of being engaged to one of those, so I fell for it as well.
You've done well.
Yeah. Going back to what you said about Merlot, though, do you think is it alcohol extraction? Because I've worked a lot on the Bridgepaw Triangle, and I find some of those Merlots from there to be a little fleshier, and I really like those. But I've also loved some 100% Gimblett Gravels Merlots as well.
I think that 10,000 years of soil build up, volcanic and wind blowing and whatever form is basically for me better for Merlot. There are pockets of the Gravels that are good for Merlot as well, but in general the Gravels suit Cabernet family. And I quite recently at the Gimblett Gravels sort of regional annual vintage selection tasting, I put it on record to everybody that I think we should have more Cabernet and Cabernet Franc in that soil type and less Merlot. So I'm quite open about it. However, a lot of my surrounding
controversial, oh my gosh,
colleague wineries base their top wines on Merlot. So that's just an opinion that I have. And yes, I believe in general the Bridgepaw Triangle. This is vintage dependent. Yes, you'll find that the Merlot's more plump and probably taste more like Merlot, which is quite important.
Yes,
really.
Yeah, it is. But also, it does go back to like the year we just had in 2017, where I think everybody struggled with the reds to get at the end of the season. We had a fantastic summer, and then where probably some Merlot on the Gimblett Gravels with those free draining soils would have been pretty handy in a year like this, which we've had before that 4 really good ones, but 2 of those probably had some significant rain incidents again in March that you were jumping and dodging a bit. Even 14 had probably, now we say rain at the right time, but it was a little bit touch and go at certain times, But I think it is a real advantage in a year like this for the Gravels,
Yeah, I think that's always been my opinion with the Gravels versus perhaps other regions in Hawke's Bay, is that when you take, it's not just one vintage you're talking about, it's you have to make wine. We don't have to, but you generally make wine every year.
Yeah.
And I think definitely in a very, very dry season, hey, maybe the Gravels might just be a bit too dry, but in a very, very wet season, I know where I prefer to be. So
yeah,
I think we forget, once the wine's in the tank, we often forget about the season. And it's interesting to go back to look at some of the climatic data and to see how certain events do change you can almost taste the wine when you look at the weather and throw the soil and everything else, and it becomes a bit more confused. But there's definitely a place for both regions, and the great thing is that they actually taste unique and different, and there's definitely blending options for wineries as well. So
yeah, it is not to get too hokey, but it is like a bit of time travel, because you go taste wine and go, oh yeah, I think people will taste the 17 wines 4 or 5 years from now or whatever and go, that's right, there was a hot summer, so there is something there to these wines. It wasn't 2012 or something where it was pretty cool all year or something, and there should be some intensity that. And I don't know about you, but the whites that came off were beautiful, I thought.
Yeah. I think people probably look at the news and hear that we've had 2 cyclones and this sort of thing, but in a lot of cases the fruit was off before that, and up until then it was like the driest, warmest summer in record. So yeah, it's a lot thrown at you in one season. It was a remarkable season in a number of ways. But yeah, I know we've got some of the best sort of Cabernet we've ever had, and some Chardonnay that's awesome. So I mean, there's a few casualties along the way, but just because it rains doesn't mean it's the end of the world. I remember working in Burgundy in '99, and I arrived. I think the first day I was working for a little property that had 8 or 9 Grand Cru vineyards, including Le Morichet, and it rained every day of harvest, but not much, but it rained every day of harvest pretty much. And I was going to the proprietor, the owner, winemaker. It's like, isn't this bad? He goes, no, we win a little bit. And if you look back at the '99, particularly red Burgundies, they're being regarded as one of the top vintage of that sort of period. So just because it rains isn't such a bad thing. Hey, we probably had a bit more rain than we'd absolutely like in 2017, and but it, the first 150 mils pretty much just settled the dust. But we didn't need perhaps all of we got. But that's when it comes down to sort of having your experience and knowing what to do when, and I think being in charge of your own destiny and being out in your vineyards and being close to your vineyards. And there's been obviously a lot of contract growers that it's been really tough, and maybe working with big companies that are off-site and away from the region. The numbers were never probably going to attract somebody to harvest them, but in fact, in a lot of cases, the flavors were there at very low sugars. So it's another story. But it's been difficult for some, for sure.
And where's the Pinot Noir site for you guys?
So we have 2 Pinot Noir sites for Trinity Hill. So we have one. We have the most southern vineyard, which we lease in Hawke's Bay, called Mangarapa Station. So that's near Porongahau, and we have about 3 or 4 hectares there. And then we have we've a vineyard that we've owned and now actually will buy back fruit called a Spree, which is about 20 minutes out of Hastings, up in the rolling hill country, and that's sort of limestone, sandstone country.
Whereas, I think I've been to that vineyard. Maybe
beautiful vineyard. Beautiful
really
vineyard.
Nice.
And so that makes up sort of 7 or 8 hectares of Pinot Noir for us. The Porongahau vineyard is argillite, which is quite a cool soil. It's sort of halfway between clay and stone. One of the soils of Sancerre, actually. So that vineyard was actually purchased more for Sauvignon Blanc, but the Pinot Noir has been a lovely sort of add-on to that. So,
without giving away all your trade secrets, are you pushing it with any whole bunch or anything as far as all these Pinophiles are pushing it with these days? Or
yeah, well, people ask me what my favourite varieties are, and I do love sort of the Burgundian varieties, so Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and Syrah as well, in terms of the varieties that we grow and make here, and both with Syrah and Pinot Noir, I like a component of the whole bunch thing. It's again, it can take the wine to a different place, and sometimes that can be a bad place, but it's very vintage dependent. But yes, we would normally use sort of 30% whole bunch.
That's cool.
Yeah, in that wine, and that's it's season dependent. So in the warmer years, we'd tend to use a little more, and in the cooler years less, and Syrah in general as well. So, but there's lots of different ways of doing that particular style, and you have to be very careful not to sort of overdo it, or just maybe
make it a stem wine.
yeah. It's like anything. There's many ways.
Yeah, and speaking of Syrah, your Balancia Syrah, I think I always get excited when I taste a new vintage of that, because I always feel like you're gonna push the envelope as far as style or suit, maybe, that, like you said, vintage wise. I'm always interested to see what you're going to do on a particular vintage, whether it is some whole bunch or, dare I say, a little Viognier in there. Though I don't know how secretive we have to be about that either.
No, there's no secrets, mate. No secrets at all.
But yeah, you've done well with that wine. And does that all come from that hillside vineyard as well?
So we have, so talking about 2 brands, I suppose, that we own. So we have Balancia, which is our main sort of parent brand, which means balance and harmony in Italian. So I worked in southern Italy for 3 harvests as a sort of flying winemaker back in the 90s. So thinking about doing our own thing and my partner Lorraine and I both being Librans, I was looking in the horoscope and some sort of quiet weekend on my own at the cave, and saw this Balantia and sort of thought that sort of works for us with the balance and harmony type thing and the Libran connection. So we started that brand actually 20 years ago as well. So when we arrived, I sort of negotiated to start and make our own wine at the winery. But we mentioned earlier, I also bought some land, or Lorraine and I bought some land from Robert and Robin Wilson in '97, and we planted this crazy hillside vineyard, which we have kept the Italian connection, so called La Collina. And so we have 2 wines made from Syrah, one under the Blanche label and one under the La Collina label.
So does the Balancia fruit come from somewhere else?
So the Balancia fruit will often be maybe some fruit from the hillside that wouldn't go into La Collina.
Because La Collina is the top.
Yeah, so in a vintage like 2011 and 12, we sort of protect that brand. So all of the fruit would have gone into the second label, essentially. Not that we call it a second label, but that label. And then it's been a bit of a mixed heritage in terms of the vineyard sourcing, but we've taken fruit from the Gravels and Bridgebar and hillsides and stuff. So
what is, because I've had a mate who's worked on that vineyard. What is that soil up there? It's all I heard is it's really slippery.
It can be. Yeah, he wasn't wearing the right shoes. So basically, this is Roy's Hill, which this is where the rivers sort of changed. The Narrara rivers changed course and gone from one side, from the east side to the west side. So this is, I believe, come out of the sea like 50,000 years ago. So it's sandstone with a lot of limestone amongst it, and obviously some, probably 50,000 years of accumulation on sort of parts of the sort of areas that's been able to sort of stay on. But it's relatively steep, and most of Roy's Hill's not particularly, hasn't been formed in a way that you can plant a lot of grapes not easily.
It's kind of weird how some spots face north and some really don't, you know, and then there's parts on the south side that actually look great, and then they get shaded for a good part of the day, and it's kind of a weird turning little hillside there. Yeah.
Unfortunately, in New Zealand, in a lot of cases, the geography hasn't really helped us in terms of planting beautiful sort of north-facing slopes that you might see the equivalent in Europe and other places. But we've got a bit of a crazy vineyard, and the slipperiness is probably because it's silica, like it's.
I think it was just during winter and it was wet. It wasn't.
You'll get that,
Yeah.
But the amazing thing for us, and the great thing is that when we made our first wine from the property, it tasted unique, and it tasted very different to what we were doing from the gravel. And even if you make the wine exactly the same way, you can absolutely see the expression of the place, and that to me is for all those blood, sweat, and tears, it's nice to see something very positive coming out to the other end. We also have some Chardonnay there, and very recently picked our first little bit of Nebbiolo, which is more of a fun sort of project, and that's cool too. It tastes like Nebbiolo, which is again quite important.
That's exciting.
So we'll donate that to the charity auction, the Cranford Hospice auction.
Oh, cool. So then just very little bit the first.
We made it at home actually. We took it home to our own little baby winery in the kitchen. So. It was quite fun to do that. Go back to your sort of winemaking roots, and our general philosophy is to do as little as we can, and that's what we don't do that makes a difference, rather than what we do. So it's sort of a hands-off wine, and all hand destemmed and made in sort of it's not a bathtub, not even big enough for a bathtub. So so it's a cool little wine, and the amazing thing is, you get a lot of attention when you do some of these crazy little kooky things, but it's never going to be making us rich or anything. And we might like to sell 25 cases or something one day.
I think it keeps you grounded, and not I'm saying you, but anybody. But certainly I'm hearing that in what you're saying, that it keeps you grounded and passionate and really in touch with, the history. And I'm from Philly, and I go back and I'll randomly meet. There's like this group of guys and women in South Philadelphia, which is the real Italian section where my grandfather and grandmother are from, and they did it when they were there. They made wine in the basement, and these guys come up sort of sometimes with the tail between their legs, like, we wouldn't be interested. I'm like, yeah, man, I want to taste that stuff. That sounds so cool, And we're all of a sudden we're trading stories and talking about it, and it is those fun little projects. I try to do something like that every vintage, something weird off to the side that keeps you in touch with the history of it all, not just some big vat of fruit, which is obviously fun and important as well. But to just have something weird like that is really cool.
That's right. I might have mentioned earlier, I did some sort of flying winemaking roles sort of in the 90s, and worked in Hungary in 1992 for about 6 months. And I remember sort of, I was only maybe 24, 25, and arriving at the winery, getting dropped off from Budapest airport, and the translator who I needed to be with, because Hungarian's impossible, looked me up and down and said, "You're the expert." And I think they made it a passion to see whether I was an expert. And on the weekends we'd be out tasting, and of course that tasting was not tasting; it was like drinking. So I remember some of those amazingly good wines. But yes, they stitched me up a few times for sure.
What do they produce there?
Oh, lots of different stuff. I was actually making more of the sort of classic French varietals for the UK market, but they had a range of their indigenous varieties and lots of sort of muscat sort of based wines. Pinot Gris, which they call Sucabarat, it was a big variety, and lots of wines I can't remember, to be honest. One or two reasons probably.
But more whites and reds?
No, mostly, a bit of a mixture. Yeah. Reds, whites, sweet wine, and brandy, which was probably the killer.
Oh yeah, that'll do it. So yeah, we're kind of working in reverse here, but you were raised in New Zealand? Where?
Yeah, I was raised. My family were basically they come from Taranaki, or I was born in Howrah, which is west coast, not probably an hour from New Plymouth, and so that was dairy, and so my father my mum and dad were farmers, and they relocated to the Bay of Plenty in the 60s, when I was late 60s, when I was only 1 or 2. So my father then got into sheep and beef in the Bay of Plenty in a little town called Katikati, and then had some difficulties with that, with the humidity and facial eczema and whatever, and then got into kiwi fruit and sort of mixed orcharding, so avocados and citrus, and so very much a farming background. And my brother and I, and to a certain extent my sisters, we weren't really that interested in it. I was the youngest of 5, and I don't know, I never showed much interest in that side, but it might have been latent, I guess. So I started went to school in Tauranga, and then after that wasn't really sure what to do, and started a food technology degree at Massey University, which I didn't complete. But then one way or another ended up working in a winery, the only real winery in the region. So that was Moreton Estate. And I'd actually met John Hancock, who I still essentially work with. And we're playing cricket. And he said, I wasn't going back to university. And he said, well, we need some help. We're going to have a big vintage. And so, I started just sort of as a raw sort of 19, 20-year-old in a winery, and spent a lot of my winemaking actually with Steve Bird, who was the winemaker there. And did a couple of years.
Is that a Birds from Hawke's Bay?
That's not a bird from Hawke's Bay. No,
okay.
That's I don't believe so. So Steve, he started his own brand called Thornbury, which you might recall.
Yes,
is now owned by Villa Maria, and now I think Steve Bird wines.
I think I just read an article about that guy. That's really random. Like 2 days ago,
right?
It popped up on some website, and I said, "Who's Steve Bird?" And then I was like, "Oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, that's interesting."
So I loved it from day one. I think probably painted the crusher and did random stuff, but I had a bit of skill, at least with some laboratory stuff, so I was okay. But I was very raw and pretty hopeless, I think. But I loved it from day one, and after a couple of years, sort of decided, well, is this going to be maybe a career? So I sort of had a chance to go to California and work a harvest, or go and study at Roseworthy College in South Australia, and chose that path, which is probably a sliding doors sort of moment. And then like a lot of the winemakers in New Zealand, that was one of the only real good options and I think a great option, because it gets you out of the region and just from a networking, and even now we have winemaking colleagues in Portugal and England and all over the world. So I'm not sure if you want me to continue, but after that,
definitely,
I briefly came back to New Zealand, and then got to speak with a guy called Kim Milne, who's a master of wine, was one of the first. Well, he's not a New Zealander, but he with Bob Campbell, I think he was one of the first MWs from New Zealand.
First dude around here.
Yeah, so he was starting a project in the UK, which was essentially a flying winemaking project where he puts largely Aussies and Kiwis into sort of far-flung or not places in parts of Europe, and basically places that had huge potential and maybe just weren't reaching them for one reason or another, and often because they didn't have any focus in the winery.
So, not to just get too into this, but what was his cut of that? What he had like a fee? It was like a company he was
working for a company, yeah, and so he was the sort of main consultant guy for that. So I initially went to Hungary for 6 months.
So he wanted good people to work with.
Yeah, so you were like the hired help essentially. But yeah, you got to travel and people say, well, where did you learn to make wine? And I guess it's what most people say. It wasn't necessarily university, but that was the grounding. But working in a place like Hungary or southern Italy, where you had to you're on the ground, and language difficulties and diplomacy and all these sort of skills where you really learned how to.
Which parts of southern
wine.
Italy? Or?
I was down in Puglia, which is
really?
Right down.
Yeah. And
so that was with Primitivo and Negromato.
Bit hot.
Relatively hot. Yeah, not ridiculous, but made Chardonnay in Puglia that did very well at one of the international wine. Won a trophy at the International Wine Challenge, which was quite a thing. So yeah, you learn that climate and soil and everything are there, but you can work with them. So I guess, and I look back at where I learnt wine, and I think that was probably where I learnt to make wine and those experiences. And some of it wasn't ideal necessarily, but it was a real challenge. And I guess at the end of it, I look back at a lot more fondly, perhaps than some of the time during, because it can be quite frustrating just getting things done in those projects. But
it's weird how I look back at some of my early days in Hawke's Bay where I was on a bike, and it was, you were just cursing yourself. But I now laugh and go, that was probably the best thing and I learned the most during those, it was certainly the quickest learning curve, it was, and there's no other way to do it. You got to struggle to learn, and then hopefully you can laugh at it because you got through it. There's no other. I don't know anybody who said everything was great and it was easy and now I'm successful. Maybe there's people like that. I don't know many of them.
No, you're in the wrong industry.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's cool. And then eventually, so we're through the 90s basically, where you're back and forth to New Zealand. Were you working for any producers here when you or Southern Hemisphere producers?
So I was bouncing between hemispheres at that point. So, and I'd met Lorraine at Roseworthy, who she was a brewer before going into studying wine.
A good woman to know.
Yeah, Australian brewer. Yeah. So I was sort of travelled after Roseworthy. Lorraine actually went and worked at Delegates with Brent Maris for 3 or 4 years when he was she was involved with the sort of origination of Weather Hills and Oyster Bay, actually. So there's a bit of history there. And I was travelling, and we came to New Zealand for a holiday, and then she ended up getting a job at Delegates in Auckland and lived there for 4 years. And then I continued to travel doing these flying winemaking type things, but also coming back. I always wanted to get to Margaret River. So I think one sort of afternoon at Roseworthy, we decided to drive to Western Australia from Adelaide, which fortunately the car broke down about 5 hours out, but it's like a 3-day drive.
Yeah, it's a big drive.
That was kind of a frustration that we never got there.
Yeah.
So I just put my CVs out to a few wineries and ended up getting a harvest at Cullen, which is sort of icon family there, and then met Vanya Cullen's I guess brother-in-law, Mike Peterkin, and he had a winery called Piero, or does have a winery called Piero. So I worked actually three vintages and full time there for a couple of years. And Lorraine came and worked over there for a year, and we lived in Margaret River, and then it was another sort of crossroads time we wanted to start our own little brand at that point. That was sort of 1996. So yeah, we contemplated doing that sort of thing in Margaret River, and then I got this opportunity in Hawke's Bay. So that was, and then I guess we also were keen to start a family and be a bit more stable, so we chose the Hawke's Bay option at that point.
I hear that from a few people. Yeah, I decided we want to start a family and move to Hawke's Bay back to Hawke's Bay or whatever it is.
It's definitely a great place to bring up children. And of course, our kids now think it's boring and whatever, but I think
be back.
they'll be back when they realize how good it is.
Yeah, that's the other story I hear is the sort of the second act, if you will, is they go away and then they come back, and because it is a good place. Well, that might be a good place to leave it, because we rewound the clock there for a little bit, but I suggest for those folks listening, they'll probably have to rewind this episode and catch up with all those brands you named and wineries you named, because there's a lot of good ones in there. And well, thanks for doing it, man. I'd taken a little time out of your day to come down the road for a visit.
No worries, Dan. It's like, I guess you're on the other side of the hemisphere to some of the listeners, so it's almost in reverse anyway. It'll all work its way out.
Yeah. All right, man. Cheers.
Cheers.
There you have it. A lot of info crunched in that, was it 45 minutes or so? Really interesting guy. Really enjoyed speaking with Warren. I want to thank him again for doing it. He's a busy guy. The commute was easy for him. He's just up the road. That is true. But just a good dude, man. And like I said, you're probably going to have to go back and listen to that one a couple times to get all the things that he said there. For you wine geeks and up-and-coming winemakers, there's a lot of info in there. Once again, any correspondence, anything you want to reach out and ask about, email us, decibeldispatch@gmail.com. We'll get back to you. Remember to go to that gimblettgravels.com website, check out the annual vintage selection, pretty cool stuff. And decibelwines.com. Send me a note. Check me out on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I try to do different things and update some really cool stuff from going on down here in Hawke's Bay. And got some travels coming up. That should be interesting. But next week, we've got another epic dude with Gordon Russell from Esk Valley, who's worked extensively with the Gimblett Gravels, and another sort of fantastic winemaker and a really interesting guy. So the hits keep coming, guys. Pretty cool. I'm excited. We're doing this little Gimblett Gravels series. It's giving me access to some of the best winemakers in the world, and with someone making some of the more interesting wines in the world. So talk to you soon. Cheers.